Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight's conversation is going to focus on regulation of faith-based organizations and how we can best protect congregations from exploitation and fraud. It is indeed a hot topic. We've had a lot of people talking to us before this event started, and we're very happy to be here discussing this tonight. And joining us this evening, two panelists, two guests on The Square tonight. I'll start with you, Dr. Usta Kaitesi. We are joined by Dr. Usta Kaitesi, who is the Deputy CEO at the Rwanda Governance Board. Dr. Usta, thank you for being with us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Joining us as well is a pastor, because this conversation involves not only the regulator, but we also want to hear from people from the religious community. And joining us from Christian Life Assembly is Pastor Hassan Chibirango. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
As always, the Square is made up by four resident panelists. My name is Dana Mpisi. I'm part of the Square, and I'm also joined by my fantastic panelists, Charles, Berna, and Ephraim. Always a pleasure to have you on the Square.
Diana. Thank you for having us.
Now, like we always do before we get into the show, we're going to have a slight weekly review, and I'd like to ask my panelists, the four resident panelists, what their highlight of the week so far has been. And I'm going to start with you, Berna. Let's keep it short, and if you can tell us what your highlight of the week has been, or is it a collective highlight that you have?
Yes, I think it's collective.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
Vision City. I'm just about to apply for a government job. That's one. But on a serious note, as a taxpayer and as someone contributing to the pension fund, I'm hoping that they will get it right this time. I don't know if they're getting it right, but as a taxpayer and someone contributing to the pension body, I think we need more accountability.
She's being very political with her answer. Frankly speaking, we talk about institutional coordination on the Square. I think it has become a song. And, it shocks me when guys go and create things that seem to be made in silos. The assumption that somebody under head of department or head of department and below earns a salary twice as much as the amounts that are listed on those two-bedroom apartments, three-bedroom apartments. It doesn't add up. Not forgetting that these people are also have car loans and are receiving lump sum for those car loans. So this is something that I'm not a city planner. I'm not a financial person. I don't know what happens at Rwanda's RSSP. But I know that if I'm going to create a product for a particular market, I have to find out what the market earns. It's that simple. I think we talked about affordable housing last week, and Charlie was defending affordable, saying that there's affordable housing in Kigali. I want to hear his take on this 60% off.
Two things about that reduction in prices. One, terrible idea. You can't get a civil servant who is below the grade of a head of department, expect him to pay more than 580,000 francs per month for a two-bedroom apartment, and expect to have a queue of people buying that apartment. That is number one. So that's where I'm coming from. It's a terribly bad idea. The second one is ignorance. I don't know what RDB has to do with selling houses. I think that's a topic for another discussion.
I think that's a topic for another day, but I'm also very sure that these decisions will come to light.
Yeah.
Right now, I think the way they're released to the public begs more questions than it does provide answers. So maybe this is something we'll discuss next week.
Yeah.
So yes, this evening we're discussing the regulation of faith-based organizations in Rwanda and listening to the regulator as well as organizations that have been regulated. And these are the two members of the panel, our guests this evening, who are presenting these two sides. So my question that I'll start with is to you, Dr. Usta, on behalf of Rwanda Governance Board. And before I get to the gist of my question, I'd just like to read a bit of a few statistics on this particular issue. And this is to do with the closures of churches over safety, amongst other things. So from February 2018, an estimated 8,000 churches and 100 mosques have been closed across Rwanda. This is according to government's last figures. And we are also informed that some of them have been reopened since taking corrective measures. But my question to you is to broadly, before we get narrowly into this particular question, is to broadly give us concrete reasons as to why government executed these closures. And this is for the benefit of viewers, not only in Rwanda and outside Rwanda, but also to lots of churchgoers. What were the reasons for government extensive closures of these faith-based organizations?
Well, thank you, Diana, for raising the question. And I would like to mention that the closures were actually an issue of compliance. There were two major elements of compliance. The first is a legal requirement. For every faith-based organization to work in this country, they are required to have at least a temporary registration, proof that they are working with the local organization that the local administration that they are working in. So some of the faith-based organizations that were closed, they lacked any legal base for their operations. They had not even informed the nearest local government leadership that they were gathering or they were meeting. So that alone allowed a lot of the number of houses of prayer, I think I will use the word, the number of houses of prayer that were closed. The second element is an issue of security. The security and the tranquility of the people was core. We had some faith-based organizations praying in houses that were basically below standards, lacking minimum water facilities, lacking places where people would really find the right access, lacking such things like toilets and all of that. So for that element, that was absolutely an issue of security, protecting people from such an environment that would not be acceptable. And let me mention that when it comes to that, the building code applies. So I should mention that when the closures happened, maybe something that people should understand, there were basic standards that reflected what standards were required by the law. RGB and the Ministry of Local Government put together the standards, and they were shared by the districts. So each district set a committee, including a member of the faith-based organization. And they did not go to close. They went to inspect. And through the inspections, they were able to find certain facilities were absolutely lacking. Minimum standards. You know, people had been moved from places where they were at risk, but their houses of prayer had stayed in those areas of risk. You probably will remember that some people died out of lightning in the period, depending on the nature of the houses. And probably the last element was soundproof. I have followed the square discussing about nightclubs. Yes. So it's not a requirement just for the churches and for the houses of prayer. It's a requirement for noise pollution that is all over the country, especially in the city areas. And those are the decisions. I mean, that's the environment that informed the inspection, of which some were requested to improve. Others got temporary closures. But those that lacked legal documents stood in that process of seeking the right legal documents to operate. Even actually just an operational permit at the low level for some faith-based organizations that lacked as well.
Before we open up before we open up the panel, I would just want to, if you can, this follow up, if you can give us a bit of information on this particular question. The statistics that there are 15,000 churches across Rwanda and only 700 of them were registered. How true is this? And also, what about the new law, or the law that was supposed to come into effect in June of this year, requesting faith-based organizations to be registered? If you can briefly comment on that.
In brief, there were things that were not clearly regulated in the previous law, including how churches opened up branches. So we had almost close to 1,000 churches, houses of prayer registered or faith-based organizations registered. But they could have the right to open really branches without informing us. We found some people practicing, unfortunately, what I would call a bit of dishonest, because they lent permits. So I would lend a permit, my legal personality or my temporary permit, to a pastor or somebody who leads another congregation because we are close, and then they would go and open. So on record, we have the legally written, but then the multiplication that was based on those kind of practices went wide. But the law also allowed a little bit of that loophole. So the law, the previous law allowed people who wanted to meet to inform the sector level. It also allowed that people would require a corroboration letter, which we do also for NGOs with the districts. So with this new law, and then there was another element of giving a temporary permit. RGB gave a temporary permit. And when you look at it genuinely, the temporary permit was just operational, but you don't have legal status. You cannot be sued, you cannot sue, you cannot own property. And that really also led to a lot of malpractices in the process. So this new law that was adopted last month requires that for a faith-based organization to start operating, they're going to have a legal personality. The process has been really brought down because initially you applied for a temporary permit in 2 months, in 60 days, and then thereafter, after a period of 1 year, you could apply for a legal personality. Still, that would take 3 months to process. But now in 2 months, you apply for a legal personality, and you get the legal personality and start operating with the existence of the legal personality.
Very interesting. Ephraim?
I think for me, the question that was, at least I think we even discussed it on the square, was that RGB's action in relation to the closure of the churches seemed more reactive, and it seemed more of a cure, and instead of it addressing the initial problems that could have been preventative. And I just want to ask, on your end, what sparked the decision? Because I'm assuming before the point where you decided to close the churches, you knew that there were some churches that were not necessarily adhering to the standards. But what prompted you at that point to decide to start closing some?
Well, I think first of all, I'm going to explain that it wasn't RGB closing. RGB as a legislator sets standards, and we set standards, but the local government entities that are supposed to monitor whether people are abiding by the building code or people are operating legally were really part of the closing process as well, including the Joint Action Development Fund, which operates at the district level, and then the Forum for Faith-Based Organizations at the district level. What sparked it, I think, it's very hard to get one element that sparked it, but I should locate you back when the closures were happening. There had been a lot of people complaining about what they were going through in the houses of prayer, but it was also a season where...
What were they complaining about?
Well, they were complaining, I think you remember the situation of somebody who went on the radio and clearly abused women in a way that you could not tolerate in this country. Some people said they were being manipulated economically or financially. There were many people praying in the wrong places, people going under the waters. Really, people were looking for God in the deepest places. I have known God as being omnipresent, but I think sometimes for people it becomes hard that they go into those other places that they haven't gone to, which actually undermined their security in some ways. But it was also around the same time that we had the risks of disaster was happening as well. We had in the southern province people struck by lightning because of the structures of the buildings that they were praying in, and all of those things actually put together was an opportunity to say, can we really fashion up Can we really, but also one very important element is that RGB has been revised as an institution, which gave us more capacity and more people to run the institution with the kind of mandate that is as big as it is. So there are many factors that work together to lead to the operation as it happened.
My next question, thank you very much, Dr. Usta, and that is it's informative, I think not only to the panel, but also to our viewers watching. My next question, of course, we definitely want to hear from you, Pastor Hassan. And, and like she said, just to reiterate what she said, there are comments whereby there have been messages from religious leaders undermining various aspects of social dynamics, whether it's undermining gender equality, whether it's fraud in terms of economic or fiscal fraud to congregations. So as a churchgoer, these are some of the things that have been happening, and this is why we came up with this show, to opine on it. So my question to you is that, as a religious leader, what measures can a faith-based organization employ to actually protect congregations from these negative elements of religion?
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm a big fan of the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, I must also say, I know some of you, I know Ephraim to be a pastor's kid. A pastor's grandkid. And I also heard through the grapevine that Charles sits on a board of a church, so the church is well represented.
It's close to you.
Yeah, but just to answer your question, number one, it's very, very unfortunate. One of the things that keep coming up at the count of the church. The church, obviously, it's a few elements of people that choose to do things unscrupulously, and the church gets a bad name. The church, throughout its history, actually, even in biblical times, it's recorded that such fraud existed. When you read through the book of Acts, which is really the inauguration of the church and the early church, there's so many counts. It's like an action movie, really. When you see people using the name or the fame of our Lord Jesus Christ, or whatever he represented, just for their own gain. And obviously, the more the world advances, people become more sophisticated. To answer your question directly, I think one of the measures that the church or faith-based organizations in general need to do to make sure that such fraud is curbed is, number one, is for people to be taught explicitly to have a living relationship with the authority of this word. Because this word, I brought a prop. I brought Ephraim, a prop, and really this word is it is self-invigilating, it is self-directing, it gives guidelines upon which we are to run, even the churches that we're mandated to run. So people need to understand that no one has been given exclusivity when it comes to understanding what this word has to say, and the different guidelines, the different rules of engagement, if you will. And once they are able to know and have a relationship with this word that is accessible in so many ways, they are able to question some of these practices. Matters of spirituality are a bit difficult to kind of adjudicate, because they're very personal. People are highly emotive when it comes to matters of spirituality, and there are people who seem to capitalize on for the lack of a better word, people's ignorance, to be able to be the principal adjudicators. And it's even in our history, if you studied even African traditional religion, you always had mediums, people that were go-to guys when it came to matters of spirituality. And all you need to do is either give a few goats or chicken, and the person would inquire to the gods, if you will. And it's no different here. But when it comes to making sure that churches or faith-based organizations apply the same measure, or rather apply very good rules of engagement, it's important to revisit this. Second thing that is important is for churches to have internal accountability mechanisms, or faith-based organizations. which most of them do, and I think Dr. Yusta will tell you when we go for application of legal statuses, usually we come with a guiding document or a constitution that has articulated principles by which we are to walk or serve in integrity. Now, the issue of whether they're applied is another one. Yeah. The other measure is very many faith-based organizations. In the case of the churches where, well, I speak for the churches in this context, is just like in professions you have associations that guide your operation. I think for the real estate is the RAREB. Then you have the Rwanda Judiciary, Rwanda Journalists Association. We also have associations, especially
the sugar dealers also.
If you don't have.
So we have what we call them not associations. We call them umbrella organizations that are supposed to guide us as a bunch as to how we are supposed to operate and how we're supposed to serve the people that we've been mandated to serve. Obviously, they've not been as effective, and my appeal would be for us to use what's already available to be more self-adjudicating and self-invigilating, so that we stop, causing ridicule to the name of our Lord.
But
Brenda, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to some of the issues that he has raised. First of all, I'm a Christian, I'm a Catholic. But I would like to understand from your side, as a Christian, if I look at the response of the church to what has been happening, I find that it's, one, problematic. And why? If the church is not coming forward to condemn these acts of fraud, exploitation, and instead what you have is, pastors ganging together, then which God are we talking about? Why don't we see the church proactively condemning these acts of exploitation? Why? Why do we need government? If you ask me, because going back to what you mentioned, faith being something very personal. Being personal means actually regulation cannot be efficient, because it depends on how one understands that. And that is where the church comes in, because for many people, at least the ones I know, their pastors are everything to them. If the pastor has said, you cannot go to this place, they will not go. If they
The
say
pastor says eat grass.
Yes. And so why don't we see the church making use of that power that it has to have positive influence in our society? Why is that not happening?
If I may,
Yes.
and I think we're putting Pastor Hassan in an extremely difficult situation to answer such a question, Bana.
Yeah, the Holy Spirit.
And I'll tell you why. The worst position to be in today is the Rwanda Governance Board. I am actually in a very difficult situation on this show because Dr. Esther Kaitesi is my teacher. She taught me in law school. Pastor Hassan is my personal friend. He's taken pictures of my family in his entrepreneurial life. So I'm a little bit conflicted. But Bana, and for the rest, for the sake of our audience, we need to understand that faith-based organizations are in a totally different play space if you're to compare them with other sectors. And I'll say, if you're to go to the doctors, they are all doctors. If you're to go to lawyers, they are all lawyers. If you're to go to estate agents, engineers, and so on and so forth. Faith-based organizations, and sometimes the best example I like to give is there's a Kinyarwanda program here on RTV I like to watch, and I've watched Dr. Kaitesi on it, and they bring all representatives of the different sects to come in. By virtue of the fact that there are different sects already makes it complex.
I actually don't agree with you.
No, you're not about to change it overnight, Bana.
No, because
it's a factor of life.
Because they agree on one thing,
Yes.
that there's God. They're all serving God.
But they're never going to agree on the approach towards, one, how they are preached,
But there's
Two.
room to
Yeah. And that's why RGB is in a very difficult situation. And they seem to be like the ones who are best placed to give a direction towards
I don't
this.
think so.
And not Pastor Hassan,
if
but
we can allow-
Daktari.
Hassan should respond.
I was
But-
speaking to him, but
Dr.
let me
Easter wants
hear.
to say
I
something.
think I want to mention one core element. While it's not that when we regulate is because things are totally wrong. We have got great partners in faith-based organizations. They have worked on very many developmental projects. If you think of education, history has it very clearly how much they have, faith-based organizations have played.
Yeah.
In the health sector, they have played a lot of good roles. So I want that to be on very straight record that we are not regulating because faith-based organizations are not performing well. This is a country that has chosen to have the rule of law as its core and fundamental principle. So we are regulating not because we are extremely in chaos, but because we are a state governed by the rule of law. That is an initial element. The second element is, I should mention actually, that we are not as fragile as you think, Haba, because faith-based organizations in Rwanda are also part of the Rwandan culture. And the Rwandan culture has constructed itself on dialogue, consensus seeking, and on the principles of seeking unity and reconciliation. Today we have a forum that brings together faith-based organizations. That doesn't bring together their convictions, their doctrines, but it brings them, one core thing that brings them together is that they operate in the area of faith and they operate in the jurisdiction of Rwanda. And they also have constitutional and other legal obligations to promote the unity and reconciliation of Rwandans. So even when they have, I have not found a lot of contradiction because when we are engaging with them, they are not preaching actually. We are talking about administration and regulation and working within the spirit and the culture of Rwanda. And it has been very controversial, I must say. We haven't had extremely controversial situations.
I mean, does
when we
that
sit
mean
in,
the square is the first controversial forum around the faith-based organization?
And it's not that they are not accepted to talk, but they appreciate the environment of engaging and dialoguing, even when you don't speak on the same point the same way. I think it's the kind of the environment that you have when you're talking about things. So we've had, when we are talking about health, we will bring together different faith-based organizations who almost all of them have approaches to health. We've brought them together in terms of
Some don't want to use
equality.
condoms, others say reproductive health is good, and
then the good discussion becomes, well, we have to have a certain discussion on reproductive health. It's not just the methodology, but we all agree that birth control or reproductive health is core for the development of the country. So finding points, it's just like we have a forum for political parties. They have never merged their political ideologies, but they don't fight within the forum. I think also faith-based organizations have that environment of operation, and we have seen them operate from that regard.
Earlier on, before the show, you mentioned something about an interfaith council. So is this an example of different faiths working together to address some of these issues?
Absolutely. The Interfaith Council we had it earlier on, and it kind of slid a little bit back. And we have the Interfaith Council has been reorganized, and it's purely reorganized on the basis of the faith-based leaders, not on the RGB basis. They have initiated a process, and I think they have actually already been registered. And their idea is they operate around the same discipline, actually, let me use the word, and in the same jurisdiction of Rwanda, and they find it right to engage dialectically with each other because I realize they want to do a bit of self-regulation as operators.
Which is good.
That is what the Interfaith Council is kind of really kind of bringing together and working together about.
I'd like just to tap on to Pastor Hassan, because I think, Charlie, you let him off the hook. And he didn't really answer Berna's question. And I just want to go back to it, because, Berna, if I got you correctly...
I'm bribed.
If I got you correctly, your question was, where is the church when it comes to... Why wait for government to step in? Where is the church when it comes to actually dealing with these issues? It's very difficult, like we've all said, regulating spirituality. But you spoke about sort of checking, invigilating and self-regulation to a certain degree. How do you think this works? And to just go back to Berna's question.
Yeah, I think Berna raises it's a valid question. As somebody who is a minister of the gospel and who serves the church, just like we have a constitution in the nation that is our overarching guiding document, the overarching guiding document of the church, because it's what I represent, is this book here called the Bible. And if we cared enough to search through the pages, mostly the New Testament, most of these things are talked about. How do you deal with an erratic member or an erratic leader or preacher? Everything is given guidance through this book. Unfortunately, it's not the practice. And also, as Charles said, is that we are so diverse, yet we're supposed to unite under... all of us are Christians, but I can tell you we have over 40,000 denominations. Wow. But most of them, the majority of them, at least ascribe allegiance to this book. They know that it's the inerrant word of God. So for me, mine is to make an appeal to say, let us go back and draw references and principles and use them to self-invigilate. Otherwise, we end up leading our people the wrong path.
Frame, I think there's something you wanted to say earlier on that you've been holding in, but I think it's time for you to share.
I think when you come down to this conversation, there's a belief. Okay, there are two aspects. One, Dr. Usta talked about not all faith-based organizations are bad. But what you see happen when, again, these quote-unquote stories get out of pastors saying very blasphemous things, or seeing things where you see maybe a reflection of fraud in some instances where offering is being received in exchange for a blessing of a Range Rover. What ends up happening is that you find that and I see this as a Christian, you see that a narrative gets told to the public that faith-based organizations, all of them, period, are bad. And for me, I keep asking myself, I'm like, at what point do we come out to say that it's not all, and separate the wheat from the chaff? To say that this is good, but this is bad. That's one. But then two, I think also for me, it then leads to the belief that the members of these churches are blind. So me as a Christian, I am blind to the...
Well, they've been blindfolded.
I'm blind, or I'm brainwashed. And I think what ends up happening is, or at least my question, or at least this is just a rhetorical question more than anything. Who sets the moral standard for what a blind follower is? And that's the question. Who sits down and says, oh, those people are blind because they believe in that pastor? Who says? And that's why I think for me, this conversation around faith, we really need to, I would want us to settle this right now. What is a blind follower?
Back to my point that Dr. Istaka Stacey and the RGB is in a very difficult position. This is one of those that we cannot leave to self-regulation. The other day we talked about Massacre Hospital and negligence on the medical personnel. The medical practitioners sorted that out, and the medical practitioner was suspended or whatever happened. In the legal profession, the same thing happens. They have a way of dealing with a legal practitioner who has gone astray. We cannot leave it, and I really envy. I do not envy, so let me retract that. I do not envy to be in the position of RGB. They're in the most difficult of situations. They're dealing with, because they're very, very diverse situations. But let me just say one thing, and that's around the Holy Bible. Humility And that is where the biggest problem is. Because we have forgotten, as Christians, the principles of the Bible. And one of them is around humility. Humility is a virtue. We will even take this beyond the Bible and take it to His Excellency's speech at the last leadership forum, when he was telling all leaders, Mwiyoroshe, loosely translated to, bring yourselves down to your people. That is where the problem is. And I am sorry to say this, I have apologies if it offends Pastor Hassan. The biggest challenge that you will see is around the charismatic churches. That is where the lack of humility is really predominant. Something as small as the way you dress. It is not by design or by default that when you go to a Seventh-day church or a Catholic or Protestant or Anglican, all this, that everyone wears a robe. It is a sign of humility. But when you go to a charismatic church and they are going to judge you by the bling that you have, the gold carats of your watch and the rings and what have you.
Which church is this?
Yes.
I'm curious. I've never been to.
Yeah, you have to. You'll see them. They will
which
put
one?
their.
In Rwanda?
No. With the exception of the mainstream churches, with all the other churches. Mm-hmm. And it's not. I'm saying this not because Pastor Hassan is there. Mm-hmm. I used to go to CLA, and one of the things that struck me about CLA was the simplicity of the pastors. At one point, I thought they were shabby. Yeah, because they would dress simply.
I would like to
Yeah,
ask
they would dress simply. But I left CLA for a totally different reason that I'll talk about. But I want to emphasize my point around simplicity and humility.
And based on
Yes.
that, before we go for the break, very
the
quickly, before we
charismatic
go to
churches,
the
I
break.
would just, Diana, the charismatic churches will put a lot of emphasis on the way the preacher appears before the flock.
Yeah,
And I have
absolutely.
a problem with that. Yes.
Absolutely, and you repeated that absolutely. And I want, just before we go to the break, what's your take on that element of humility? And I don't only ask this to Pastor Hassan, but also you, Dr. Uster, if you can comment.
Yeah,
on that.
thank you. I really want to commend Charles for bringing the issue of humility up, because it is really, for the lack of a better word, our modus operandi. It should be our operating system as people who believe in this book and who are followers of our Lord Jesus Christ, who represents really all the churches throughout our different denominations. He was simple, he moved simply, he operated simply, and he charged us to do whatever we do from a place of humility. And actually, when you added the word humility, it actually decompressed or made simple the complexities that we've made things out to be. It's actually not complicated. We have complicated it, number one, because of our lenses of culture and our own, the way we articulate these things, the way we interpret this book, most of it which can be interpreted so wrongly because we've not taken time to study or be trained on the right way to interpret this. And what happens is obviously spiritual abuse. But humility and so many other principles could help simplify whatever is going on. Yeah.
Dr. Uster?
Well, thank you. I think that the model of leadership that a lot of the faith-based follow is about servant leadership. And you cannot serve except if you practice humility, because leadership is actually an act of humility itself. But let me also go to the Constitution of the Republic of Rwanda. Article 46 of the Constitution requires us to maintain good relationships with others, good relations with others. And I want to mention that it stops people from, it requires individuals to treat their fellow citizens without discrimination, and to maintain relations aimed at safeguarding, promoting, and reinforcing mutual respect, solidarity, and tolerance. Now, mutual respect, solidarity, and tolerance can never happen in a superiority relationship. It requires a sense of humility, for you to be able to practice mutual respect, to safeguard one another and reinforce one another in a way, and then to tolerate the differences, the different perspectives, but also the fact that we are just different. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We're definitely coming back to this after the break. We're here discussing the regulation of faith-based organizations in Rwanda and how can we protect congregations from elements of fraud against different religious leaders. Please stay tuned. We'll be back right after the break.
Many people have been asking what we have been up to. Well, we have told the different stories from decision makers, but this time round, it will be different. We will be getting head to head with various influencers and get to the heart of the matter. It is not an easy ride, but we'll endeavor to get you there. It will be insightful, informative, and at times we will agree to disagree because we are the bridge to your leaders.
Welcome back to The Square. Tonight we're here discussing the regulation of faith-based organizations and how to protect congregations from elements of fraud, amongst other things, by religious leaders. We are here joined by Dr. Usta Kaitesi from the Rwanda Governance Board, as well as Pastor Hussein Kibirango from Christian Life Assembly. So very quickly, we're just going to go to a Twitter feed and listen to what you, our viewers, are telling us online. And the first tweet is from Jackson. And Jackson is talking about appreciation to Dr. Kaitesi for rich information shared. And he says, my question, what are the power limits of the Interfaith Council? Does it play any role in the regulation process?
Well, thank you very much for the question. The regulation process, I think, is actually a matter of the state. But creating an ethical environment of operation, creating self-regulation, known as a regulatory framework, creating a sense of discipline within itself, that they can do. I think I would like to remind us that faith is a right that is protected by the Constitution and guaranteed by the state. So I should mention that while we would like to see them deal with their issues very closely, that does not suspend at all the responsibility of the state. Article 13 of the Constitution really says that the state has the obligation to respect, protect, and defend human rights, including faith-based organizations. The practice of faith for individuals. So the Interfaith Council, as it grows, it's an organization like others. It's actually also a forum registered under RGB as an organization. We hope religious leaders can find confidence within themselves and internally bring greater sense of sanity,
That is not
greater
going to happen.
discipline. If it doesn't happen, the state is not under any form of suspension.
Fantastic.
The obligation on the state to protect, defend human rights, including the right to the freedom of religion and conscience, will always stay.
And it's a priority.
And is a priority.
Can I say why that's not going to happen? And I will repeat 1 million times why I don't envy Dr. Esther Kaistet's job. You see, at the beginning of the show, Diana, you said it well. There's fraud. There's a lot of dirty stuff that's happening. And for us believers, that is, we feel, very many of us feel that we have been forsaken. By virtue of the fact that a pastor is going to stand in front of thousands of people and promise them Range Rovers because they tithe or they put in extra offering than what they plan to, that's extremely concerning. By virtue of the fact that a pastor is going to come up and say that he is the best guy when it comes to giving you a husband when you're past your menopause, and just for purposes of drawing a lot of flock to his church, is extremely concerning. So the point I'm raising is RGB is in a very difficult situation. They are managing a situation of emotion. It has a lot more to do with belief and regulation. The easiest one they had to do was, do you have toilets? Do you have, how much parking do you have? Is it double story? Do you have soundproof? They will come and do all that. Will it take away the fact that these people are taking advantage of I'm sorry, I might use some extremely harsh words. Thugs are taking advantage of the flock that have come to their churches. It will not.
I think,
and Euster, you will not be able to do that.
I think, Brenda,
yes.
before you, and to answer Charles's question,
Yes.
absolutely, it's difficult to regulate matters of faith.
Yes.
But I think the most important thing is contributing to a conversation, to this
Yes.
particular narrative.
Absolutely.
And what we're having on the square, what was on a different show on RBA last week, the radio shows that I know, Hassan, you've also been on talking about this particular issue. I think the fact that there's a conversation about an issue is a start of something
Yes.
that RGB is hoping to, deal with. Brenna, if you can say
Yes,
something.
I would
before
like to
we-
disagree with him. I actually don't think that, I don't agree with him that RGB has a difficult thing to do, because RGB has enforcement agencies working with it. So it's very simple. This is the law, and you have law enforcement agencies which can follow up. Let me tell you the difficult bit. The difficult bit is, how do we get these people who have made themselves gods on earth, and people look up to them, and they promise all kinds of things, and people take them for what they are? And this, which goes back to my question, the responsibility of the church. Where is that leadership that says, no, pastor and so, you cannot say this. It is misleading. It contradicts the Bible. That is one. Two, where is the role of the church in terms of building our society? We are grappling right now with issues of teenage pregnancies. We are grappling with issues of broken homes, all sorts of social issues. Why is the church in this? I mean, the Bible talks about family. The Bible talks about values of, peace and all kinds of things. So when we see the church focusing on one particular area of wealth creation, which is kind of artificial, because you'll have a pastor say, just pray, and everything will be done, without explaining to people that, yes, prayer will help you, but you have to do the heavy lifting of working so hard. So, which goes back to my question, which hasn't been answered up to now, the role of the church. Where is that leadership?
Pastor Hassan,
Yes, if
please.
I could quickly, number one is you've talked about two issues. I think we're on the issue of fraud. fraud is fraud, okay? Fraud is illegal, and fraud should be dealt with accordingly. But just to speak into what Charles said, and I'm trying to understand him, is because matters of spirituality and the faith, people are easily manipulated because we become so gullible. When somebody comes and says, I spoke to God yesterday, and God is telling me this concerning you, and they have all these things that they do around that. If you do not have your own personal growing relationship with this God to question, because every member of the Church of Jesus Christ is called to question, such fraudsters, if you will. The other issue around the church is doing quite a bit in the area of social development and also dealing with the ills of society to the best of our ability. We've been sidetracked, obviously, with what is going on. But for me, I would still bring it back to the members of the church. No one has special access to this book or to the principles therein. Read and understand it, and understand your position as a member to question when you notice fraud, because it's as addressed in clear. I don't want to go into stories, but if you've read a bit of this book, you know stories where, for example, a guy came in the book of Acts and he saw these apostles doing miracles. And the guy said, how much do I have to pay? He used to be a traditional, spiritist. He says, how much do I have to pay for me to get that power so that I can earn more money out of it? And they rebuked him sharply. So there's so many stories. Obviously, the context was different. The culture was different. But let me tell you, for where people are involved, you will always have people who want to get ahead in life by manipulating people. And fraud happens, unfortunately, to my shame and to the shame of the body, in church, just as it happens everywhere else. And people are always thinking up new ways of defrauding people. And this is where I think, number one is we are all under the canopy of the state. And where fraud is seen, fraud needs to be dealt with heavily.
I'd just like to touch briefly. We're coming to the end of the show, but I've been listening to this very interesting and dynamic conversation. But I have a personal question when it comes to elements of this charismatic churches, if you will. And this is based on an article I was reading, whereby the article was stating this whole wave of evangelism that's taking place across the continent, across Africa, is leading to a crop of very lazy and short-sighted Africans. Because again, like what Charles and Brendan Ephraim was saying, you have someone who says, if you seed this much, if you give this much tithe, the next day, miraculously, your problems will disappear. And it's encouraging a mindset of people not actively and proactively and deliberately trying to better their situations or themselves. What's your take on this, just briefly, before we close?
As a matter of principle, I'm in disagreement with that practice, because it contradicts, again, what the Bible says is the Lord whom we all pay due allegiance says, when it comes to the blessing, he doesn't go outside of his principle. He blesses the works of our hands, not the amount of prayer or water sprinkled on your head and amount of promises, because it's a matter of principle. When you put a seed in the ground, you water it and it grows in its due season. So when it comes to matters of earning money, it comes through a process of work and hard work, just like Bernard said. But obviously, again, because people wrap it up with a sense of a spirituality around it, it is an easy sell, if you will. When it comes to spiritual matters, it's an easy sell for the quick gain of some. But I think, like Charles said, is we need to look at this broadly and say these are matters of the spirit, and they need to be interpreted well. But for me, I'm always brought to assurance, the fact that we have a guiding document that all of us have access to, that we need to know in order to call out whoever has self-conceited agendas. Yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't have time to read all the tweets that you're sending us, but please keep this conversation going. Use the hashtag #TheSquareRW. We're coming to the close of the show, a very dynamic conversation going on. But right now, what I'd like to do is just give our guests here and our panelists just a few minutes to give closing remarks before we end the show. And again, please keep the conversation going on social media.
Well, thank you very much. Two core things. Rwanda is the state governed by the rule of law, and nobody is above the law. Faith-based organizations, civil society, business, we all are under the rule of the law in Rwanda. And secondly, we have committed to build a dignified Rwandan. And practices that undermine the dignifying and the development of Rwandans cannot be tolerated within matters of faith and within matters of practice, I would say. So the faith-based organizations as well will have to measure up to the commitment of serving the citizens for Rwanda and for heaven, if that is what their core mandate is, but first for Rwanda, because the citizens, when they are still alive on earth, they are in Rwanda and they should live a dignified Rwandan life that we have committed to.
Thank you very much, Dr. Usta. Hassan, if you could give us your closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you. My parting shot is really simple, is that as somebody who serves the church and who is a minister of the gospel is simple. It's actually good news. The good news is that God entered covenant with man through our Lord Jesus Christ, and his mandate is to reconcile man to God, and his mandate is for us who follow him to be able to do that on his behalf today through love, through humility, and the message is the same. The methods might differ, but we need to understand and have a personal relationship with this God. We need to understand this word that he has given us, read it for ourselves every single day. We should be able to, with time, tell and be able to tell apart those that are for the Lord and those that are coming with their own agendas in the name of the Lord. Thank you.
Just before I give my panelists closing remarks, I'd also like to reiterate on behalf of the Square that we're not only talking about Christianity, we also apply this conversation to other faiths. So Islam, Buddhism, Mormonism, if all that is happening in Rwanda, it's the same tenets that apply to them as well. Ephraim Brenner, if you can have few words to give your closing remarks.
Very few words. I think for me, and I asked Pastor Hassan this earlier, but it was just a general question. You know, we talk of blind followers, and we talk about protecting these blind followers from exploitation and fraud. But the fact of the matter is, when you ask these people to attend general meetings in relation to their churches and all of that, they don't show up. And the reason why is that these people don't mind the exploitation and the fraud. So at the end of the day, when we try to define blind followers, we really need to know who are we trying to protect and from what.
Unfortunately, Brian and Charles, I have to cut you short, so we are running out of time, and I'm very sorry about that. But next time, the closing remarks, we'll start with you two. Thank you very much for joining us. We've run out of time, but thank you very much for joining us. Discussions of faith regulation of faith-based organizations, as well as how we can invigilate when it comes to protecting congregations from these ills. I think this is a conversation we'll definitely repeat on the Square. Thank you for joining us. Please keep the conversation going, and please join us next week, same time. Have a good evening.
Rwandair, renowned for its tremendous ability to fulfill your dreams, invites you to connect more with your friends and family in Europe with 3 weekly flights to Brussels, one of the most popular cities for the African diaspora. Take advantage of the exquisite service on board our punctual flights, connecting you to over 22 other destinations in our fast-growing network.